Welcome back to another episode of the Mythbusters series, where we try to distinguish between fact and fiction in the world of nutrition. Today we are tackling a big one, gluten. So you've probably heard someone somewhere say that everyone should be avoiding gluten. So today we will be diving into whether that is the truth or not. Before we do that, just a quick introduction. My name is Melissa Nell. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm part of the Body 20 Nutrition Doctor team. Very welcome if you are new here. We do these videos every 2 weeks, and you are also very welcome to send us any questions if you have any via WhatsApp or email. Alright, so let's get back to the question. Should everyone be avoiding gluten? Before we do that, let's quickly just look at what actually is gluten. Now, gluten is a protein we naturally find in grains, like for example wheat, barley and rye. Gluten gives that nice chewy texture to bread, and it actually helps dough rise. So we find it in everyday foods, that we consume without even noticing. So gluten does definitely form a big part of our daily lives, and we often find it in our more convenient types of foods and our carbohydrate foods, for example. Now let's look at some people that might need to be avoiding gluten. So our first group of people include people that actually have been diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder called celiac disease. Now, celiac disease is something you actually need to go to your gastroenterologist, for example, to get a proper diagnosis. The diagnosis isn't actually a very simple one, unfortunately. They might need to do a biopsy, for example, and do a few genetic tests. But if that diagnosis has been confirmed, you definitely, by all means, need to avoid gluten. The gluten sensitivity and the autoimmune response in someone with, for example, celiac disease is quite major. Now, what happens in celiac disease is when there's a consumption of gluten, it actually triggers an immune response that's very damaging to especially the intestinal, the gastrointestinal tract. So if you have celiac disease, definitely avoid gluten at all costs. It's even as strict as making sure you don't have gluten in your hand cream, for example, as it gets absorbed through your hands. The next group, we find people that have gluten sensitivity, so or more correctly referred to non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where celiac disease was ruled out, but these people do still find that they have symptoms like, for example, stomach bloating, cramps, maybe diarrhea or constipation or pain when they consume gluten. Lastly, we also have wheat allergy, where people are actually allergic to the proteins in wheat that include but isn't actually just limited to gluten. So in general, people that have celiac disease, gluten sensitivity and wheat allergy should probably be avoiding gluten. But gluten isn't necessarily that bad for those that don't have those issues. So if you, for example, don't have gluten sensitivity or celiac disease or wheat allergy, it doesn't necessarily mean that avoiding gluten-containing foods is generally going to be healthier. If you actually look at the gluten-free products you find on the market, they often are quite higher in sugar, and they often use a lot less products or flours, for example, that have a lower fiber content. Gluten-containing products, like for example your whole grains, provide really important nutrients like, for example, fiber and even a few vitamins and minerals. And if you are avoiding gluten just because maybe your favorite influencer said that, or you heard it via the grapevine, you might actually be missing out on a few key nutrients, especially fiber, as whole grains often do contain gluten. So in general, if you don't have any of the medical conditions that I've mentioned, you actually don't need to be avoiding gluten, but it's something that you need to be more mindful about when you are consuming foods. Some people don't necessarily notice that they have a bit of a gluten sensitivity, whereas others are very much more in tune with their body. So I do recommend that if you are experiencing some gastrointestinal discomfort and you're not really sure what it is and you can't pinpoint it, maybe keep a food and symptom diary for a while, where for a few days you write down your symptoms and what you ate, to see if there's a pattern where you can see, oh, actually every single time when I eat a slice of bread, I do feel a bit bloated, or I feel a bit sluggish, or I feel a little bit of stomach cramps, or whatever it might be, and see if you can find a pattern in that, and then try to eliminate it for a while to see if it gets better. But you don't need to eliminate it indefinitely, especially if it doesn't leads to a relief in your symptoms. You'll typically see a relief in symptoms within 2 weeks, so you won't need to avoid it for longer than 2 weeks to actually see whether it is, helping or not. Lastly, the thing that I want to say about gluten is, like I've mentioned before, is that often these foods are made with, less amazing ingredients. So generally it's not a healthier option, and it often costs a lot more than your general gluten containing foods. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope the myth has been busted. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.